Hi, I'm Howard Sublett with Solutions IQ, and we're live podcasting today at Agile 2015, and I have the pleasure of a dear friend of mine to be able to sit here and talk with Esther Derby. Esther, thank you so much for visiting with us today.
Hi, Howard. It's always fun. You always make me laugh.
We're going to laugh.
Okay, good.
And if you don't, I'll say something very inappropriate. So, you did 2 sessions here at this one. So,
I did.
One was 6 rules for change. So
Yes.
what do you mean by that?
Well, I have found that a lot of the popular literature about change is very deterministic and very much kind of a Big Bang thing and ignores the fact that humans respond to change. Right? So over the years, I've been involved in many change efforts, and I've observed what works and what doesn't, and I've distilled it to these 6 rules.
Okay.
So.
And they are? Are they?
Can I think of them off the top of my
Well,
head?
they're your 6 rules.
Well, start from a place of congruence,
Okay.
because that's the only place from which empathy is possible.
Okay.
Honor what has been, what has worked about the past, and what's working now. Because it's not helpful to make people feel like they've been wrong, right?
I think most consultants miss that one right
Yeah.
there.
Ooh. Yeah, so nobody likes to come in and feel like the way you've been doing it for 20 years is stupid. Right, so honor the past, what has
Okay.
been valuable in the past. Assess the current state. And saying it's not good enough is not good enough, because you really have to deeply understand what the problems are, what your current state is, and what's holding the current pattern in place. Because very often people try to push a change, but there are so many factors in the organization that are holding that current pattern in place that their efforts are futile.
Right.
So you have to assess that, see what you can shift in the pattern, and see who's willing to work with you. Because there's always more energy in working by attraction than by trying to push change on other people.
Sure.
So assess what's possible, assess what the current situation is, and then activate networks. Because networks are a great way to infuse ideas into an organization. If you just rely on the hierarchy, it always kind of feels like an order. But networks, which work out and across, are very powerful for infusing ideas. And they get people looking at things from different points of view. 5th, you guide the change. So change can only be nurtured, right? So you have to guide, you have to know when you have to have something apply globally and when you can allow for local variation,
Right.
and work by successive approximation rather than trying to predict something will happen immediately. And finally, you engage in experiments, because big change feels very threatening to people. It just feels like, too much. So if you do experiments, they're small, they're bounded. It feels like, well, we can do this, but if it doesn't work, we're not stuck with it. And so it gains learning and buy-in. So those are the 6 rules.
I actually had a client I was working with that just the word change just caused a visceral reaction that we changed to a word experiments, because they had been through so many change efforts and they had such a bad experience with some of them. And instead of adopting change, just the vocabulary we used, we said, would you be willing to subscribe to an experiment? And they go, oh, we can do that.
Yeah.
And that was very easy to do.
And it's been really interesting to me that experiments have come up in a lot of talks this year. I heard Will Evans talking about it, Henrik Esser talked about it. He had a really interesting way to do experiments, where they would look at what the problem was, what behaviors they wanted to see. They start with the behaviors they want to see, and then they think about, well, what capabilities or learning is necessary for that? What structures might help that, and what processes would support that? Which is the opposite way people usually come at it. They usually talk about, we have to have this process and this structure, rather than here's the problem, here's the behavior. And then they do it in iterations. So they are working in an agile way to bring agile change. So I thought that was fascinating. But I've heard it come up in 4 or 5 talks.
I actually just sat with Jim Benson a little bit ago, and he was talking about not using user stories at all and just writing hypothesis of what you think the outcome might be, and make it a validated hypothesis that you have to run experiments on. So taking the whole idea of user stories, instead of them being kind of dictatorial of what we're actually going to do, it's a I have a thought
Yep.
that if we do this, this might happen.
Yep.
And let's run experiments. So changing the whole format there, which
that's
it
another
fits
one
right
that
in
came
there.
up. Yeah, and that
what
was
you're talking about.
some of the flavor of Will Evans' talk. So both of them posted slides, so download them because they're great.
And you had a whole other session. So
Yes.
the other one was about coaching flow, moving past resistance. What do you mean by resistance?
Oh, well, you've never had anyone resist a change?
Not me. I'm just
Not
really
you
that good.
personally.
I
You're
just
that
come
good.
in and they just
Yeah.
change.
Well, I did that session with Mike Lowry, so I want to give him a shout out about
Okay.
that. He's a great Agile coach who's working at MXI now, but I've known him for a long time. What I have found is that people don't resist change; they resist coercion. They resist being told what to do and being pushed and prodded. So we were looking at ways to reframe the resistance and get curious about what's going on for people so that you can actually learn about what their experience is and use it to inform the way you're changing. And we had people do an influence map so that they could look at, if I want to bring about this change, I can work directly here, but, I might be more successful if I work with this person over here, changing what they expect, changing what they ask for. Mike used this analogy that if you're telling the cook to make bacon, but everybody's asking for eggs, he's going to keep making eggs. But when people start asking for bacon, he'll change, right? So that's changing what people are asking for or expecting. Or also finding people who are willing to work with you on the change. So we did a map about that, and then we talked about some ideas about reframing relationships. Because if you have a negative conception of someone, if you've labeled someone as stubborn, for example, that was one of the examples that came up, that is how you are going to filter every one of your interactions with that person. So from a negative adjective, you go to a neutral one. So stubborn might be, advocates for what he thinks is right. That's more neutral.
Sure.
And then if you can, go to a positive. And that will give you many, many other options for interacting with people.
I can see that working in
Yeah.
almost any coaching engagement to
Yeah.
kind of keep those things in mind,
Yeah.
because I know it's really not about it's not about the things on the right. We're actually influencing the people. So this is about working with people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And making work better. So yeah.
So we actually had people do an influence map in the session.
Wow.
And one guy came up to me after the session and said, I thought that was going to be the stupidest exercise I've ever done. So this was the dumbest exercise I've ever heard of. I said, but I actually learned a lot from it. I really, once I started sketching things out, I saw a lot of issues in my organization that I could approach differently. That was fun.
Those are always the sessions that,
Yeah.
the ones I think I can't learn anything in because I don't agree with them,
Yeah.
those are the ones that actually challenge me personally the
Well,
best.
which is useful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, speaking of experimentation,
Yeah.
I hear that there is something new in the world of rhubarb.
Well, I fear that I am gaining a reputation as the crazy rhubarb lady.
I wouldn't say crazy, but
Okay,
the
thank you.
rhubarb,
Yeah.
like queen, yes.
Oh, the queen. I like
The
that.
queen.
I like that much better. Yes, the queen.
So what did you just? You
rhubarb.
told me earlier you did something with rhubarb I've never heard anybody on the planet do.
Well, after making like 6 different kinds of rhubarb cake,
yes.
many of which were delicious, but the Icelandic Happy Marriage rhubarb cake, I did not save the recipe for that one. Although I like the name, I did not save the recipe, but I made many lovely rhubarb cakes. And I'm also working on another aspect of my garden, and I wanted some stepping stones.
Okay.
So I got these big old rhubarb leaves, because some of them are, a good 2.5 feet across, and I used them as concrete forms, stepping stones. Using rhubarb leaves as the form.
That's probably an experimentation no one else on planet Earth has
I could
ever
show
done.
you a picture.
I don't think I want to see that. I think that's TMI.
They came
So,
out really
Esther,
nice.
if somebody out there wants to know about any of the things you've talked about, including how to make concrete steps with rhubarb leaves, how do they reach you? How do they find you?
Well, I have an email.
Wow, technology. What would that be?
Esther at estherderby.com. I have a website, estherderby.com. All one word.
And you're an independent, and you're available to come.
Yeah,
present,
I work with people all over the world. I do a mix of consulting, workshops, coaching. I actually have a lot of. I talk to people all over the world.
I know you do.
On my coaching. So
and you're
it's
fantastic at it.
great. Yeah, well, I have fun.
I always learn something from you, Esther. Thank you so much.
Howard, it's been a pleasure.
All right, thank you.